The air on Ethel was thick with the scent of ozone and something else. Something sweet and alien that clung to the back of the throat. Joran felt it with every ragged breath he tried to steady. The journey from the human fraternity to the planet's surface had been a lesson in escalating anxiety. And now, standing in the grand hall of the Ethelgerd Queen, he was fairly certain his body had forgotten how to perform basic functions like swallowing, or remembering how his legs worked. The hall itself was a living, breathing entity. Walls of pearlescent, swirling nacre pulsed with a soft, internal light, and the floor felt faintly spongy, like moss under his standard issue diplomatic boots. He wasn't a diplomat, not really. He was a xenobotanist, a man who talked to plants because they were far less terrifying than people. Yet, here he was, part of the Third Contact delegation, because someone had decided the Queen's famed gardens might be a good talking point. He was the talking point, the human who knew about flowers. The absurdity was almost enough to make him laugh. If he weren't so utterly paralyzed. Remember, Helena, the actual diplomat leading their small group, had whispered just before the vast, iris-like doors opened. No direct eye contact for more than 3 seconds. Do not speak unless she addresses you directly. And for God's sake, don't touch anything. Then the doors had dilated, and Joran's mind went blank. She was there, seated on a throne that seemed grown from the same luminous, organic material as the hall. Queen Serafina. The briefing vids had not done her justice. They had spoken of her 7-foot stature, her skin the color of twilight amethyst, the elegant, spiraling horns that swept back from her brow like a living crown. They had not captured the sheer, magnetic presence that seemed to warp the very air around her. Her eyes, pools of molten silver, held a depth and intensity that felt like looking into a starry nebula. As their delegation approached, she rose. It was a motion of impossible grace, each movement fluid and deliberate. Speaking of a power so innate it required no effort, Helena began the formal greetings, her voice a practiced, respectful monotone. Joran's job was to present the gift, a terrarium containing a rare orchid from the Amazon, chosen for its bioluminescent properties. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. The Queen's gaze swept over them, and for a terrifying second, it lingered on him. His brain, already operating on a backup generator, short-circuited completely. The carefully rehearsed words in the Ethelgerd tongue evaporated. She was now standing directly before him, her height forcing him to look up. The scent of her was intoxicating, like night-blooming jasmine and cold starlight. Helena had just finished introducing him as their emissary of terrestrial flora. The Queen's silver eyes fixed on his, and she asked a question, her voice a low, melodic hum that vibrated in his bones. "You are the keeper of the growing things?" It was his cue. He was supposed to say, "I am honored to be in your presence, your radiance. I have brought you a specimen from our world." But his brain, in its infinite panic, misfired. It took in the awe-inspiring, powerful, maternal yet deadly figure before him and, desperate for a familiar box to put her in, supplied the worst possible word from the deepest, most inappropriate recesses of his psyche. His mouth opened. "Yes, Mommy." The word, in plain English, hung in the air. A clumsy, ugly sound in the refined silence of the hall. Time stopped. Helena made a small, choked sound, as if she'd been shot. The 2 Ethelgerd guards flanking the Queen, who had been still as statues, shifted almost imperceptibly, their hands tightening on the hafts of their energy spears. Joran felt the blood drain from his face so fast he saw spots. He was dead. He was going to be disintegrated, or fed to a giant plant, or his atoms would be scattered across the galaxy. He had single-handedly caused an interstellar incident because his stupid, traitorous brain had decided to call an alien queen Mommy. He risked a glance up, expecting to see fury, disgust, the cold finality of a death sentence in those silver eyes. Instead, he saw curiosity. Queen Serafina's head tilted, her expression unreadable for a long, heart-stopping moment. Then, one corner of her full, dark purple lips quirked upwards. It wasn't a smile, not quite. It was the look of a scientist who has just seen a lab rat do a backflip. The silence stretched, becoming a physical pressure in the room. "What?" the Queen said, her voice still calm, but now laced with a sharp, analytical edge. "Did you just call me?" Helena tried to interject, to apologize, to explain it away as a translator malfunction. Your Radiance, please, 1,000 apologies, our translator must have. Serafina raised a single, slender hand, and Helena fell silent instantly. The Queen's gaze never left Joran. I asked him, she stated softly. The air grew colder. Joran single quotes a survival instinct, belatedly kicking in. Told him that the only way out of this was through. Lies would be detected. Only the pathetic, humiliating truth remained. His voice was a dry croak. He swallowed, his throat clicking. I called you, Mommy. He winced as he said it again, the word even more horrifying the second time. A faint ripple went through the courtiers behind her. One of the guards let out a low, guttural sound that was probably a suppressed snarl. Serafina's brows lifted slightly. Explain this term. In this context, it's a human term, Joran stammered, his eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of the floor. For a maternal figure, a mother, but sometimes it can be used as slang for a figure of immense. He flailed for the right word. Authority and beauty that you revere. He was digging his own grave. He knew it. He was just making it worse. It was a mistake, a panic-induced linguistic seizure. My brain broke. Please don't disintegrate me. He finally dared to look up. The quirk on her lips had deepened. There was a definite, unmistakable glint of amusement in her stellar eyes, a linguistic seizure. She repeated, as if tasting the phrase. She looked from his terrified face to the mortified Helena, then back to him. You break under pressure and produce this, yes, your Radiance, he whispered. To the astonishment of everyone in the hall, including Joran, Queen Serafina let out a soft, breathy sound. It was a laugh, quiet, contained, but genuine. Fascinating. She turned to Helena. Your delegation is dismissed. You may retire to your quarters. Helena bowed deeply, relief and confusion warring on her face. Of course, your Radiance. Thank you for your understanding. As Helena and the others began to back away, Serafina's voice stopped them. Not him. She pointed a long, elegant finger at Joran. The emissary of Flora stays. I wish to understand this. Panic-induced reverence further. We will discuss the growing things, and this fascinating human fragility. Helena shot Joran a look of pure, unadulterated sympathy before she was ushered away. The great doors sealed shut, leaving him utterly alone in the vast, pulsing hall with the most powerful and terrifying being he had ever encountered. The air hummed with a new, terrifying tension. He was a prisoner, or a guest, or a specimen. He had no idea which. Queen Serafina descended the steps of her throne until she was standing before him once more, so close he could see the subtle, swirling patterns in her amethyst skin. Now, Joran, she said, using his name for the first time, and the sound of it on her lips sent a shiver down his spine. Show me this orchid, and explain to me, in precise detail, how a human brain can so catastrophically fail, and yet somehow succeed in being the most interesting thing to happen in this court in 100 cycles. The silence in the grand hall was absolute, broken only by the faint, organic hum of the living palace. Joran stood frozen, the ornate terrarium feeling like a lead weight in his trembling hands. Queen Serafina watched him, her head tilted, that faint, unnerving amusement still playing on her lips. You are afraid, she stated. A simple observation of fact. Yes, Joran managed, the word barely a whisper. Lying felt impossible. Good. Fear is rational. It keeps lesser beings alive. She turned and began to walk, a slow, graceful pace towards a curved archway that our eyes open at her approach. Follow. It was not a request. He stumbled after her, his legs still uncooperative, into a space that stole what little breath he had left. It was a solarium, but one that defied human imagination. The ceiling was a transparent dome showing Ethel's twin moons, but the true spectacle was within. Plants of every conceivable shape and color thrived here. Vines with leaves like spun silver dripped from above, while massive blooms pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. The air was thick with the perfume of 100 alien flowers, a symphony of scents that was both intoxicating and strangely calming. This was her sanctuary. This is my collection, Serafina said, her voice softer now, losing its formal edge as she ran a hand over the velvety petal of a flower that shimmered like sapphire. Governments rise and fall. Trade agreements are negotiated and broken. But this is constant. This is truth. Joran's botanist heart, buried under layers of panic, began to stir. He saw a creeper with bioluminescent nodes that flickered in a complex pattern. It's communicating, he said, his professional curiosity overriding his terror for a moment. Serafina looked at him, her silver eyes sharpening. You see that? The light sequences. They're not random. It's a rhythm, like a primitive language. We have something similar on Earth, a fungus that uses electrical signals. He trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Do not apologize for seeing the truth of things, she interrupted. It is a rare quality. She gestured to a low bench grown from the same nacre as the walls. Sit. Show me this orchid you risked your life to bring. He sat, placing the terrarium between them. As he opened the lid, he began to explain, his words flowing more easily now that they were about his passion. He told her about the orchid's native habitat, the humid jungles of South America, how it lured its pollinators with its faint glow in the twilight canopy. He spoke of its fragility and its resilience. Serafina listened, truly listened, in a way he had never experienced from anyone, let alone a monarch. She asked pointed questions about soil composition, symbiotic fungi, and the nature of light absorption. You speak of this plant with a reverence you did not afford me. She noted, a teasing edge to her voice. The fear came rushing back. Your radiance. I am not offended, she said, waving a dismissive hand. I am enlightened. Your mistake was a moment of unfiltered honesty. My courtiers speak in layered deceptions. My guards speak in obedient silence. For 400 cycles, I have heard only what people believe I wish to hear. And then you arrive. She looked at him, her gaze intense. You, a man who communes with flowers, looked upon a queen, and your soul, in its panic, reached for a term of ultimate, primal respect. A flawed one, certainly, but a true one. Joran was stunned into silence. She had dissected his humiliating blunder and found a kernel of profound meaning within it. You are not what I expected of your species, she continued. The others in your delegation, they are like polished stones, smooth, predictable, and telling you nothing of their interior. You are like this, she pointed to a jagged, crystalline formation growing in the corner of the solarium. All rough edges and unexpected facets. You reflect light in strange ways. I think most of my people would just call me awkward. He admitted with a weak smile. Awkwardness is the price of authenticity in a universe that demands conformity, she replied. She stood and walked to a plant that resembled a cluster of weeping willow branches, but each strand was a fiber of pure light. This is a sorrow lily. It dims in the presence of deceit. It has been glowing brightly since you entered. Joran looked at the plant. Its light is steady, reassuring gold. A warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with fear. He was in the presence of a goddess, yes, but in this moment, he was simply a gardener talking to another gardener. Why did you really keep me here? He asked, the question leaving his lips before he could stop it. You could have had me punished, or just sent away. Serafina was quiet for a long moment, her back to him as she watched the sorrow lily. Because I am lonely, Joran, she said, her voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it. And your chaotic, honest humanity is the first thing that has felt real to me in a very, very long time. In that confession, the last of Joran's fear melted away, replaced by a startling, protective empathy. The alien queen was just as isolated as he was. The gilded cage was just a cage. And he, the clumsy botanist, had somehow been given a key. The next few days passed in a surreal, dreamlike haze for Joran. He was given quarters adjacent to the royal solarium, a clear sign of the queen's favor that raised eyebrows throughout the court. His days were spent with Serafina, discussing botany, sharing stories of their respective worlds, and slowly, tentatively, learning about each other. He learned of the immense weight of her crown, the constant political maneuvering she had to navigate. She learned of his quiet life, his love for rainy days and the smell of damp earth, his feeling of being an outsider even among his own kind. Their connection was a fragile, budding thing nurtured in the privacy of the solarium. But outside, in the gilded corridors of the palace, a storm was brewing. Its name was Lord Malak, or Malak was a high noble, tall and severe, with horns that swept back like polished obsidian and eyes the color of frozen mercury. He had, Joran gathered, long considered himself the queen's most suitable consort, a union that would consolidate his political power and her royal lineage. Joran's presence, and the queen's obvious fascination with him, was a direct threat. The confrontation happened during a public court gathering. Joran was standing slightly behind Serafina's throne, as had become his unofficial place. Trying to be inconspicuous, "Your Radiance," Malakor's voice cut through the usual courtly murmurs. Cold and sharp, "We are all curious about your continued interest in this terrestrial specimen." He gestured dismissively towards Joran. "His kind are newcomers, primitive. Their presence in your inner court is a deviation from Ethelgerd tradition. It breeds uncertainty." The hall fell silent. Serafina's posture remained regally composed, but Joran saw the subtle tightening of her hand on the arm of her throne. "My interests are not subject to your approval, Lord Malakor," she replied, her voice cool. "Joran provides insights that have been refreshing insights." Malakor sneered. "Does he provide insights worthy of the trial of affinity?" A collective gasp went through the court. Serafina went very still. Joran leaned towards Kellen, the queen's stern head of security, who had been assigned as his reluctant shadow. "What is the trial of affinity?" he whispered. Kelly in single quotes. S face was grim. "An ancient law. When a monarch shows singular favor to an outsider, any noble can challenge the outsider's worth. They must undergo a series of tests to prove their heart and spirit are compatible with Ethelgerd. It was designed to prevent rulers from being swayed by cunning off-worlders. And if I fail?" Joran asked, though he dreaded the answer. "The outsider is forever exiled," Kellen said flatly, "and the monarch's judgment is formally questioned, weakening their rule. It is a political assassination by proxy. No outsider has ever succeeded. The trials are not of strength, but of essence. They are designed to be impossible for a non-Ethelgerd to pass." Malakor smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "I invoke the trial. Let this human prove he is worthy of the favor he has so unusually garnered. Or let him be gone, and our traditions upheld." Serafina's silver eyes blazed with a cold fire. Joran could see the trap. To refuse was to show weakness. To admit her favor was misplaced. To accept was to risk Joran's life and her own authority. He couldn't let her do it. He couldn't be the cause of her downfall. Before she could speak, Joran took a step forward. Every eye in the hall turned to him. His heart hammered against his ribs, but he thought of Serafina's confession of loneliness, of the trust she had placed in him. "I accept," he said, his voice clear and steady, echoing in the vast space. Shock rippled through the court. Serafina turned to look at him, her own surprise evident. "Joran, you do not have to," she began. "I do," he interrupted, breaking another protocol. He looked at Malakor. "I may not know your traditions, Lord Malakor, but I know my own heart, and I will prove its worth." Malakor's smug expression faltered for a second, replaced by annoyance. He had expected refusal, not bold acceptance. "So be it," Serafina declared, her voice ringing with authority, now laced with a new respect as she looked at Joran. "The trial of affinity will commence at the next rising of the primary sun." The court is dismissed. As the nobles filed out, murmuring amongst themselves, Serafina descended from her throne and came to Joran's side. "That was either very brave or very foolish," she said, her voice low. "Can I pick both?" he asked, echoing the sentiment he'd had upon first meeting her. This time, her smile was full and genuine, a private, radiant thing meant only for him. "You have just taken your first step into a game you do not understand, but you will not face it alone." She placed a hand on his arm, a simple gesture that sent a current of warmth through him. "We will face it together, for the first time." Joran wasn't afraid of the alien court or its impossible challenges. He had found something, someone worth fighting for. The trial of affinity was held in the heart of the royal gardens, a vast, open amphitheater surrounded by the most ancient and revered flora of Ethel. The entire court was assembled, a sea of amethyst skin and elegant horns, their murmurs a low, anxious hum. Malachor stood at the front, his arms crossed, a picture of smug anticipation. Joran stood in the center, feeling small and terribly human. Serafina was seated on a raised dais, her expression neutral, but her eyes held a silent promise of support. An ancient Ethelgerd, his horns gnarled with age and his robes adorned with living moss, stepped forward. He was the keeper of the grove, the arbiter of the trial, the first test. His voice creaked like bending branches, is the whisper of the rootless sorrow. He led Joran to a sickly-looking tree. At the edge of the clearing, its bark was peeling, its leaves a pale, jaundiced yellow, and its few remaining flowers were brown and wilted. This ancient bloomfall tree is dying. Its roots are poisoned by a blight we cannot identify. You claim to understand the growing things. Make it hear you. Convince it to fight. The task was absurd. Joran wasn't a mystic. He was a scientist. He approached the tree, placing a hand on its rough, dying bark. He could feel the wrongness in it, a faint, sickly vibration. The court watched, some with curiosity, many with open derision. He closed his eyes, shutting out their stares. He wasn't going to whisper to it. He was going to diagnose it. He examined the soil, the pattern of the decay, the color of the leaves. He remembered a similar blight affecting chestnut trees on Earth, a fungal infection that starved the roots. It's not listening to you because it's choking. Joran said aloud, more to himself than anyone. He looked at the keeper. It's not a spiritual sickness, it's a physical one. A fungus, I think. It's creating a hydrophobic layer around the roots, preventing water uptake. He began to give instructions, his voice gaining confidence. He asked for a specific mineral compound to break up the fungus, for a symbiotic mycelium from a healthy part of the forest to reintroduce beneficial organisms, and for a carefully measured nutrient solution. The Ethelgerd looked to Serafina, who gave a sharp, approving nod. As the treatments were applied, Joran stayed by the tree, his hand on its trunk, not whispering please, but projecting a sense of calm, of hope. He was a gardener willing a plant to live. Hours passed, just as Malachor began to look triumphant. A faint green hue returned to the very tips of the branches. A single, new leaf, vibrant and healthy, unfurled. A stunned silence fell over the court, followed by a wave of astonished whispers. The second test, the old keeper announced, his voice now holding a note of respect, is the embrace of the luminous weeper. He led Joran to a pond, where the sorrow lily from Serafina's solarium grew in abundance. This one, the keeper said, pointing to a particularly large, magnificent plant, has not communicated in a generation. It has withdrawn its light. You must convince it to share its song. Joran waded into the shallow, cool water. The luminous weeper's strands were dim, barely glowing. He knew from Serafina that it responded to truth. But what truth could he offer a plant? Then he understood. He didn't need to offer grand truths about the universe. He needed to offer his own. He reached out and gently took one of the dim strands in his hand. He closed his eyes and thought not of diplomacy or trials, but of his own heart. He thought of his loneliness on Earth, his feeling of being out of place. He thought of the staggering, terrifying beauty of Serafina and the unexpected, profound connection he felt with her. He poured out his fear of failing her, his hope for something more, his sheer, overwhelming wonder at this alien world. He held nothing back. A warmth spread from his hand into the fiber of light. Slowly, then all at once, the entire plant erupted in a brilliant, dazzling gold. Then, the light began to pulse in a complex, beautiful rhythm, a visual symphony that spread to every other sorrow lily in the pond, until the entire grove was ablaze with a silent, golden song. It was the most beautiful thing Joran had ever seen. When he turned back to the shore, the court was on its feet. Even Malachor looked shaken. Serafina was standing, one hand over her heart, her silver eyes shining with unshed tears, a look of pure, unguarded awe on her face. Joran had not just passed the trials. He had, in the most fundamental way, spoken the language of Ethel. He had proven that the human heart, in all its chaotic, honest glory, was not just compatible with this world, it could make it more beautiful. The atmosphere in the grand hall was electric. Joran stood before Queen Serafina, bathed in the golden light of his success. The disdain and curiosity of the court had been replaced by a palpable, wary respect. Lord Malachor, however, was a statue of cold fury. His plan had not just failed, it had backfired spectacularly, elevating the human from a curious nuisance to a figure of near-mythic resonance. "The trials are concluded," the ancient keeper proclaimed, his voice filled with newfound vigor. "The outsider, Joran of Earth, has proven his affinity. His heart resonates with the very soul of Ethel. The challenge is void." A wave of approval, tentative at first, then stronger, swept through the assembled nobles. Seraphina rose from her throne, her gaze sweeping over her people before settling on Joran with a look that made his breath catch. It was a look of pride, of gratitude, and something deeper, something that burned with the intensity of a newborn star. "This is an outrage." Malachor's voice slashed through the growing accord. He stepped forward, his composure shattered. This parlor trick changes nothing. Our traditions cannot be swayed by a primitive who talks to weeds. Your Radiance, you shame your station by entertaining this farce." The hall fell into a stunned hush. Such a direct insult to the monarch was unheard of. "You overstep, Malachor," Seraphina said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I defend the purity of our bloodline, the strength of our throne." He snarled. He made a sharp, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. From the shadows behind the pillars, a dozen of Malachor's personal guards, clad in dark, non-reflective armor, stepped forward, their energy spears humming to life. Gasps and cries of alarm erupted. Kellen and the royal guards moved instantly, forming a protective circle around Seraphina and Joran. "You would commit treason?" Seraphina's voice was like cracking ice. "I would save our world from your weakness." Malachor yelled. Chaos erupted. The royal guards clashed with the traitors in a sizzling cacophony of energy weapons. Joran was shoved behind Seraphina as she, to his astonishment, summoned a blade of pure, hardened light from a bracer on her wrist. Meeting the charge of a traitorous guard with lethal grace. Joran was unarmed, a spectator in a fight for his life and the life of the woman he loved. He couldn't fight with a blade, but he could fight with his mind. His eyes darted around the chaotic hall, past the clashing combatants, to the walls, the bioluminescent patterns, the pulsing, living palace. He remembered the sorrow lily, how it reacted to emotion. He remembered the bloomfall tree, how it responded to treatment. This entire palace was a living, sensing organism. "Kellen!" Joran shouted over the din. "The walls! The palace feels the conflict. It's in distress." Kellen, locked in combat, gave him a bewildered look. Joran didn't wait. He closed his eyes, blocking out the violence. He pressed his hands against the pulsating nacre of the nearest wall. He poured every ounce of his feeling into it, not fear, not anger, but a fierce, protective love for Seraphina and this world that had accepted him. He projected an image of peace, of harmony, of the palace's natural, rhythmic state. He asked for its help. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a deep, resonant hum filled the hall, a vibration that made the very floor tremble. The gentle pulses in the walls became frantic, strobing flashes of red and gold. Vines, thick and strong as cables, shot out from the walls and ceiling, seizing Malachor's traitors, yanking their weapons away, pinning them to the floor. The light in the hall intensified to a blinding, painful white, disorienting everyone. When the light dimmed, the fight was over. Malachor's guards were entangled, helpless. Malachor himself was on his knees, held fast by a silver vine wrapped around his torso, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. The hall was silent once more, save for the panicked breaths of the courtiers. All eyes turned to Joran, who stood with his hands still pressed against the wall, the palace's light gently pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Seraphina looked from the subdued traitors to Joran, her expression one of absolute wonder. She walked toward him, her light blade retracting. She placed her hand over his on the wall. "You didn't just speak to a plant," she whispered. "You spoke to my home." She turned to face her court, her voice ringing out, clear and powerful, filled with an authority that brooked no argument. "Behold," she commanded, "this is the power you called primitive. This is the strength you dismissed. Not the strength of a blade, but the strength of connection. The power to heal, to communicate, to unite. He has passed your ancient trial. He has defended my life not with violence, but with understanding. And he has earned the loyalty of the very stone beneath our feet. She took Joran's hand, lifting it together with hers. And so, I make my royal decree. From this day forward, our alliance with humanity is sealed, not as subjects and rulers, but as partners, and I, Seraphina, Queen of the Ethelgerd, declare that Joran of Earth, the man who in his honesty called me Mommy, shall be my consort, my equal, my partner in rule and in life. The decree hung in the air, monumental and unchallengeable. There were no dissenting voices. The court, humbled and awed, knelt as one. The palace itself seemed to sigh, its light settling into a soft golden, celebratory glow. Joran looked at Seraphina, at the love shining in her stellar eyes, and knew that his chaotic, panic-filled journey had led him not to an end, but a beginning. He was no longer just a xenobotanist or an emissary. He was home,